Hi, my name is Gina Forster, and I am a registered dietitian and a certified intuitive eating counselor. Today's presentation is an introduction to intuitive eating, a look at 4 intuitive eating principles. A little introduction and objectives for today. We're going to describe intuitive eating, identify pros and cons of different diets, interpret the hunger scale, identify your internal signals for hunger and fullness, assess current off-limit foods and recognize the value of unconditional permission to eat, examine ways to improve your self-care, determine alternatives to food for handling emotions, and identify resources for further learning. So what is intuitive eating? It's a dynamic interplay between instinct, emotions, and feelings and thoughts. So essentially, instincts, emotions, feelings, and thoughts work together to kind of help you choose what and how much to eat. Self-care and satisfaction are the cornerstones of intuitive eating. There's 10 principles, and we're going to be discussing today the ones that are in bold. Reject diet mentality, honor your hunger, make peace with food, challenge the food police, feel your fullness, discover the satisfaction factor, cope with your emotions with kindness, respect your body, move, feel the difference, and honor your hunger or honor your health with gentle nutrition. What intuitive eating is not is a diet. This is definitely a journey, not a destination. Many diets out there will basically give you a destination to achieve. End this diet when you've reached a certain weight or when you've achieved your, XYZ goal. Intuitive eating is a lifelong journey. All right, let's consider self-care for a moment here. I talked about how self-care is one of the cornerstones of intuitive eating. We'll talk about it a few times in today's presentation. This is my son. I'll let you guess how old you think he is in this photo. He's 5 now. He was actually 4 months when this photo was taken. I love to share it because he just looks so peaceful, and also the hair. So sleep. Sleep is a huge part of your self-care routine, making sure that you're aiming for 7 to 8 hours each night, or at least most nights of the week. There's going to be times when that doesn't happen, and that is okay. Life balance, making sure that you have a balance, in your life, whether it's between your personal life, your family life, your work life, and learning how to say no when you need to. We don't need to say yes to everything that is asked of us. Giving yourself permission to say no. Nourishment is a big part of self-care as well. We'll talk about that. Nourishing your body with foods, even when you don't feel like eating. I'm thinking about specifically those times when you might feel sick or run down or stressed. Your body still needs nourishment during those times. Self-compassion. We talk a lot about being kind to others, but let's also first remember the importance of being kind to ourselves, treating ourselves the same way that we would treat others. Coming at our decisions with curiosity instead of judgment. Don't put yourself down for a food decision you make or a life decision you make. Don't make yourself feel guilty. That doesn't help. Come at yourself with curiosity instead of judgment. And then self-nurturance. What do you do to nurture yourself? Whether it's getting your hair done, going to the spa, or things that are free, going for a walk at a metro park, reading a book, or drawing a bath. We're going to start with rejecting diet mentality. I typed in the word diet on Google, a million things popped up. I put maybe 30 here in this word cloud. The word cloud could be much, much bigger. But here are some diets that maybe you've heard of. Diets have something in common. Actually, they have more than one thing in common, but can you think of at least one thing that diets have in common? Consider maybe the diets that you've been on or the diets that your friends have told you about. What can you think about those diets that are all the same? Even though they tell you they're not involving restriction, all of them involve some type of restriction. Even the one that's relatively new, intermittent fasting, they say you can eat whatever you want, but there is a restriction as far as the time. So that's restriction. You might be able to eat whatever you want, but you can't eat whenever you want. Every diet out there has some type of restriction embedded in it. Another thing is that you're using external cues instead of internal cues to decide what and how much and whether to eat. Instead of using your body's signals to decide what, when, whether, how much to eat, you're letting the diet dictate that decision. You may be familiar with this cycle of dieting. You have something about your body you want to change, you pick a diet, you ultimately have cravings, you end up having periods of uncontrolled eating, you eventually regain any weight that you lost. Up to 66% of the time, we're even regaining more weight than when we started. And then it's a vicious cycle. Many people fear that if they stop dieting, they'll never stop eating. But the truth is, it's the dieting that almost always causes the overeating. So think about that. How might dieting contribute to overeating? Think about the last time you were on a diet, or a friend of yours was on a diet, or a colleague. What do you think contributed to those periods in their life, their day-to-day activities, their week-to-week activities, contributed to those times of overeating, or when they felt uncontrolled in their eating? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with deprivation and restriction. It's your body's way of compensating for that nourishment that it needs. Your body needs nourished. When it's on a diet, it feels like it's essentially traumatized. You're not feeding it the nutrients it needs. You're not giving it the nourishment it needs. So it's having a rebound effect and causing you to overeat. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next principle. And that's honor your hunger. Principle number 2. Did you know my favorite food is cake? You probably didn't. Why would you? You've probably just met me. But now you know my favorite food is cake. And in this picture, I was in Vegas at a wedding, and I was honoring my hunger by eating the most delicious piece of cake. I'm actually very particular about my cake. It has to have buttercream icing. I don't like fondant or the shortening icing with it's not made with real butter. But I'm if I was on a deserted island, I think cake would be my food of choice, with buttercream icing, of course. I specifically like wedding cakes, so I get very excited for that at any weddings. All right, here's the hunger scale. I'm a huge fan of this because you can kind of look at this and get an idea, start to kind of become one and attuned with your body. Ask yourself, do I normally wait till a 1 or a 2 to eat? That's when you're just so empty of food. You haven't eaten in hours. It's been way too long. Or you've maybe gone days only minimally giving yourself minimal foods, minimally nourishing your body. You're on a diet maybe, and you've been on it for days. You're not nourished fully. So you're hungry. You're still hungry. You're at that 1, 2, 3 almost all day. And then there's the opposite end of the spectrum, the 10. This is that Thanksgiving. You've had your 3rd helping of Thanksgiving and you're on to desserts. You are just so full, there's no room in your belly. Sort of that sweet spot in between meals is that 5 and 6. The sweet spot to choose when to eat is around that 3 or 4. Don't want to get too hungry when you eat. You want to eat when you are just starting to get hungry, right? So more like that 4. And then when you want to stop, when you're kind of pleasantly full, around that 7, maybe teetering towards that 8. It doesn't mean you're bad if you ever go over that, or if you ever eat when you're at a 2. It's all about learning and starting to understand your fullness and hunger cues. You're going to have moments, you're going to have days when you're looking at the hunger scale and you're way off, and that's okay. It's just all about the journey and learning to understand your body's signals so that you can, at least more often than not, eat to that 7 and eat when you're at that 4, and then feel comfortable in between when you're at that 5 and 6. So what signs does your body give you that you're hungry? I want you to think about that. When I ask this question in groups, I usually always hear stomach grumbling. That's mine, for example. Sometimes I'll also hear headache. And I think for me, I think to myself, if you've got a headache, you might have gone a little bit too long without eating. Or shaking. If you're shaking, also maybe a little bit too long. What are some other signals that your body gives you? If you're not sure, I challenge you to start listening to your body and trying to understand what those signals are. They usually start happening around 3 to 4 hours after a meal, and that all depends on the size of the meal or what was in that meal prior. All right, we've got something called biological hunger, and that is just that normal hunger that we're experiencing day to day, every 3 to 5 hours throughout the day. When that biological hunger is ignored, your primal hunger takes over. So when you ignore that hunger, those hunger signals, and you get to that 2 or 1 on the hunger scale, your primal hunger will take over and you won't be able to satisfy yourself fast enough. Your body needs that nourishment and you'll eat whatever you can get your hands on. I liken it to swimming. That's why I have a picture of a swimmer here. When you were a kid, did you ever play that game where you would go underwater and try to hold your breath the longest? Whoever could stay underwater the longest wins. Probably not the safest game, but I used to always play it. And I just remember going underwater, holding my breath, and then coming to the surface of the water and then taking a huge gasp for air. That's my primal need for breathing, right? Because I've ignored my need to breathe for the past 20 seconds or however long it was. I surface the water and bam, I take this huge, huge inhale and soak in all the oxygen I possibly can. That is my body. That's my primal need for breathing. Same thing when you're thirsty. The last time you were really thirsty, you finally get around water and you chug it. You cannot get that water in your body fast enough. That's what happens when we ignore biological hunger. So, what are some things you can do to prevent that primal hunger? Prevent that essentially moment of uncontrolled eating because you are just so hungry. One of them might be to pack snacks. This is something that my mom, I always think about my childhood. She really taught me to do this. She did and still does always pack snacks in her purse and her car. She's always got a snack. And she's actually saved me a few times with her snacks. I won't lie. I appreciate that so much. Like almonds, for example, something that won't melt. Those are good to have. But having snacks with you at all time, even if you think you're coming right home, because you never know, you might end up doing something else and being gone longer than you were hoping. Not ignoring your hunger on days that you know you're going to have a big meal at night, or maybe it's a special occasion and you want to save your save your food for the end of the night. That's when you're going to get all your food that you need. Well, that's not how it works. We need to feed ourselves and nourish ourselves throughout the day, or else you're going to experience primal hunger when you get to that fun activity at night. The third principle is make peace with food. I will tell you right now, this is my favorite principle and probably the one that really jump started my intuitive eating journey. It's about giving yourself unconditional permission to eat food. In a random survey of almost 2,100 adults, about 50% said they feel guilty. So 45% said they feel guilty after eating foods they like. Ostensibly, those are foods such as burgers and fries and cake, those foods that many of us deem quote unquote bad, but that are really just food. Diet culture has made us think that they're bad, but in reality, they're just food and they're a welcome part of a balanced diet. But we feel guilty after eating those foods. Let's get rid of that guilt. Let's give ourselves unconditional permission to eat foods, no matter what it is. So chronic dieters live in their heads and second guess the needs of their bodies. Think about the last time you were on a diet or you knew someone on a diet. Maybe you were at a restaurant and you were served, your meal. And instead of thinking about how delicious it was going to taste and how excited you were to eat it, instead you were in your head adding up the points or the calories and making sure that what you were served would fit into your diet. That's living in your heads, not trusting your body to know when to stop or to know what choice to make and your food choices. Food restriction is actually what contributes to overconsumption, just like what we were talking about. That primal hunger takes over when we restrict food or when we have food rules. It's important to no longer make food a morality issue, no longer put foods into categories of good or bad, or in this picture here, the apple gets a yes, the chocolate gets a no. Those are food rules. That's something we're going to slowly try to get rid of in our day-to-day life. And remember, this is a journey that might take some time, and that's completely fine. And honestly, It's to be expected. So right now, do you have any off-limit foods or foods that you simply limit? Maybe you allow yourself the foods, but you have limits on them. Self-imposed limits, diets, essentially. Restrictions, right? That's what they are. If you have foods that you limit, you're kind of putting yourself on your own diet. Even if you're not on a diet, in a way, it's sort of like a diet. So think about those foods that you're limiting or that you won't allow yourself to have. The idea of unconditional permission to eat is really about breaking away from those food fears and those food rules. So this is what people think when I tell them unconditional permission to eat. They think, Gina, if I give myself unconditional permission to eat food, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to eat burgers and fries and cake all day long. And you know what? If I'm being honest with you, that might happen at first. If you have been restricting those foods for some time, you'll find that when you add them back into your diet, it's harder to feel fullness and satisfaction from those foods. It takes a lot longer. So you might eat them more than you ever have before. That is normal. But eventually, after some time, you will find that those foods will fit in a balanced way in your balanced diet. You'll find room for other foods, and you'll begin to actually really want those foods and realize how good they make you feel, whether it's a fresh vegetable or a cooked vegetable or fruit or frozen fruit, fresh fruit, pasta, a bowl of oatmeal or Cheerios, whatever it is. Those foods will all find their place in your diet as well. But you've got to remember that permission. It's the key word, permission. And it needs to be unconditional. So here's how that happens. It's something called habituation. It explains what happens when you're repeatedly exposed to the same stimulus. It could be a sign on your drive home, or a smell in your house, or a food in this case. The novelty of it begins to wear off. So once you continue giving yourself permission to eat a food, after a while, it's not going to be something you crave anymore. You're not going to think about it all the time because you know if you want it, you can have it. It's really a great feeling. So that's habituation. Think about it this way too. The more a person's exposed to a certain food, the less appealing it becomes. The opposite is the less you expose yourself to it, the more appealing it becomes. So the more food restrictions you have, the more appealing those foods are going to sound. If you're restricting chocolate, you're going to always want chocolate. Okay. Think about leftovers. That's what I have there on the right there. If you make something really, really tasty, for me, it's lasagna. I love lasagna. It tastes really, really good. And I think it tastes really good as a leftover as well. So I'll make it, I'll eat it, I'll love it. I'll put it in the fridge for tomorrow. I'll eat it the next day. It's still good, not as good. Day 3, I'm just really getting sick of it. Day 4, I cannot eat another bite of lasagna. And it really doesn't have much to do with the fact that it's been in the refrigerator for 4 days. I feel like lasagna tastes pretty good after being in the fridge for a few days. And in fact, sometimes I think it tastes better. Anyway, but after 4 days of eating it, habituation has taken place. And I no longer want it. It's not as appealing to me. Principle number 7 is cope with your emotions with kindness. What are some emotions that evoke a desire within you to eat? Think about that for a second. What are some emotions that sort of draw you to food? Could be anger, loneliness, boredom, anxiety, stress. Here's the question. Are you taking care of you? Is your emotional eating actually not emotional eating? It's actually related to a lack of self-care, like we talked about at the beginning of this presentation. It's when you're lacking in self-care, when it's hard to be attuned to your body's needs and desires, or your body's hunger and fullness cues. So while you might think it's emotional eating, it could just be a lack of self-care. You're eating and eating and eating, and you think it's because of emotions, but in reality, you've lost touch of your body. You're not attuned to those signals anymore because your self-care might be a little out of whack. So let's reevaluate your self-care practices. Also, self-care, nurturance, compassion, all parts of self-care are integral to helping you deal with the emotional ups and downs. So maybe you are having an emotional time, and maybe you are finding yourself going to food during those times. If you're not balanced in your self care, your kindness towards yourself, your compassion, your nurturance, it's just more difficult to handle those emotions. So if food is your way of handling them, if that's become your coping mechanism, let's reevaluate your self-care, your body kindness, your compassion towards yourself. And maybe that will help you sort of cope with those emotions better. So, as a reminder, self care basics: sleep, life balance, comfort, warmth, relationships, creative stimulation is another big part of it. Nurturance, asking for hugs. My mom is a big hugger. I'm not, but I know that that's how she feels nurtured. So, of course, I'm always going to give her a hug. I would do that anyway. She's my mom, but that's how she feels good. That's part of her self care. Reading a book for pleasure, getting a massage, meditating, and compassion, kindness for yourself, being kind to others, but most importantly, kind to yourself, coming from a place of curiosity instead of judgment, not putting yourself down for decisions that you make, learning from them. Okay. The next time you go to the refrigerator or go to the kitchen and you think maybe you're eating emotionally, just stop and ask yourself, what am I feeling hungry right now? I've become more attuned to my body. I know what my hunger signals feel like. Am I having them? Am I actually physically hungry? So this is what the HALT stands for: hunger, anger, loneliness, or tired. So what are you feeling now? If you're not hungry, are you angry, lonely, or tired? If you're not hungry and you have one of those other emotions or another emotion that's not listed, what do you actually need instead of food? If you're not at a place and you're not ready to change and you want to eat the food that you were going for, even though you're not hungry, so be it. Go ahead and do it. Don't judge yourself for that decision. Or, of course, if you're actually hungry, go ahead and eat too. But if you decide to make another decision to handle that emotion, you can do something like call a friend or write in a journal, draw a long bath, snuggle with your cat. That's what I like to do, or your dog, or whatever pet you have, or give someone a hug. Gentle nutrition is also a really important part of intuitive eating. It is definitely saved for the last principle, and that's because what we don't want is for you to start making food rules for yourself again, or restrictions. A lot of times when you bring nutrition into the conversation with intuitive eating, people have the tendency to start making rules again. So this is really, really saved for the last principle. Once you feel really good about letting go of diet mentality, listening to your body, trusting your body, that's when this gentle nutrition really comes into play. And it's a part that I love to talk about because, after all, I am a dietitian, and I do very much like to discuss balanced eating and nutritious foods. Intuitive eating is a journey, not a destination. I would really love to be beside you on that journey. My Nutrition, Unmeasured Wellness, and Intuitive Eating program includes the Body Kindness book by Rebecca Scritchfield, an intuitive eating workbook as well by the two co-founders of Intuitive Eating, Elise Resch and Evelyn Tribole, bi-weekly personal consultations with me via an online secure portal, guided meditation at the beginning of each consultation, access to me, your intuitive eating coach for your journey throughout the week for questions and anything that is on your mind. I can be the person that you come to when you're having those emotions. Free once monthly support sessions after completing the program. I'm not going to just leave you after you leave my program. Once we've both decided that it's time for you to end the program, you're feeling good about where you are, you'll have access to a free once a month support session with me. I really hope to hear from you, and I hope you learned some things in this presentation. Thank you so much for listening.